Number 10 for this evening, our number 10 reason for rejecting Muhammad as a prophet for this evening is that according to Muhammad, in a revelation he claimed to have received from God, the sun sets in a pool of murky water. Now, the reason this is important is because Muslims, as their main argument for Islam nowadays, appeal to scientific accuracy, the amazing scientific accuracy of the Quran. And they usually don't bother to show people how the Quran is scientifically accurate. They walk up to people and tell people that, right? Because people in the West have a pretty high regard for science. And so Muslims come along and say, you see this book? It's filled with amazing scientific accuracies that no one could have known. No one could have known in Muhammad's time. No one knew them for centuries. No one knew them for centuries after Muhammad's time. It's only today that we are fully coming to grasp the amazing scientific insights in this book. And people convert based on hearing that, not realizing, wow, maybe I should actually bother to read the book and see what it says on various scientific topics to see whether this claim is true before I go ahead and convert to a religion. Well, I actually don't like nitpicking on every little scientific problem we might point out in the Quran, unless the argument is being made against me that this book is confirmed by science. Then we have to go through the claims it makes. But I want to address one right now that is very important because it's not something Muslims can reinterpret. Right? There are passages in the Quran that seem to be saying something obviously false. And a Muslim will want to say, well, what that really means is something completely different from what it says in Allah's perfectly clear word. Allah brags over and over again in the Quran that His word is perfectly clear. Muslims find something that's obviously false, and so they say, what He really meant was something totally different. And here we have a passage that is so obviously wrong that Muslims try to reinterpret it in our day. The problem is Muhammad himself gives the interpretation. And according to Islam, Sam, who is a greater interpreter of the Quran than Muhammad himself?
Actually, Muhammad is also called the walking Quran. Mm-hmm. He actually lives and breathes the Quran, so there is no greater authority on earth to explain the Quran than Muhammad.
So if Muhammad says this is what the Quran means, does a Muslim get to say, well, Muhammad's obviously wrong, I'm going to interpret it this way?
Unless they think that they're a prophet of a higher status than Muhammad, there is no way you can deny the words of Muhammad. Now, they may say that the narration itself is weak, or that the narration falsely attributes words to Muhammad, but we know they can't even appeal to that argument because what you're about to quote is deemed sahih, meaning sound, without any error or defect in its chain of transmission. So if you're going to call into question this so-called sound narration, then you're going to have to call into question the entire corpus of the hadith literature.
In which case, we don't know anything about Islam.
Exactly.
We don't know anything about Islam. We don't know anything about the formation of the Quran if you start throwing out
Precisely.
the narrations that describe how the Quran was formed. All right, well, let's look at the passage. This is chapter 18, verses 83 through 86 of the Quran. And they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Many Muslims say this is referring to Alexander the Great, but whoever it refers to, the same situation applies. And they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I shall recite to you something of his story. Verily, we established him in the earth. This is Allah speaking. Verily, we established him in the earth, and we gave him the means of everything. So he followed away, until when he reached the setting place of the sun, he found it setting in a spring of black, muddy, or hot water, and he found near it a people. Notice what this is saying. He reached the setting place of the sun. So not only is there a setting place of the sun, you can actually get there. If you travel far enough, you can get to the place where the sun sets. There is a place where the sun sets. And where is this place? He found it setting in a spring of black, muddy, or hot water. And not only that, he found near it a people. So we have a couple of things here in this passage. One, there's a place where the sun sets. Two, Dhul Qarnayn, or Alexander the Great, gets to this place, and there are people who live there. Now, Sam, I don't know about you, but they taught me in science class that the sun is much bigger than the earth. Could the sun possibly set in a pool of water here on earth? And could there be people who live there? Every day the sun goes and sets in this pool, and they live right beside it. They're fine, right?
To even get that close to the sun is to be,
torched. Incinerated, yeah.
You got it, man.
Instantly.
There's no way, impossible.
Now, Muslims Muslims want to reinterpret this passage, right? And there's a lot here. They have to say that there is no setting place of the sun. He obviously didn't get there, and there certainly aren't people who are living there. So they try rather desperately, may I add, to say what this is talking about is Dhul Qarnayn coming to some body of water, and he sees a reflection of the sun in the pool. And so from his perspective, it looks like the sun is sitting in a pool. And that's all this passage is saying. This passage doesn't say he found a pool and he saw a reflection of the sun in the pool. He found the setting place of the sun, found it going down into a muddy pool. But assuming Muslims want to reinterpret this, you have to deal with Muhammad himself, because Muhammad also explains where the sun goes. And this part has nothing to do with Dhul Qarnayn. This is Muhammad telling one of his companions where the sun goes. It's not, Alexander the Great is looking at a pool or something like that. Got nothing to do with this passage. Exactly. So let's see what Muhammad says. Sunan Abu Dawud, number 3991. This, again, as Sam pointed out, is classified as Sahih. Abu Dar said, I was sitting behind the apostle of Allah, who was riding a donkey while the sun was setting. He asked, do you know where this sets? I replied, Allah and his apostle know best. He said, it sets in a spring of warm water. Nothing about Alexander the Great.
Nothing allegorical.
Nothing about a reflection. Nothing about a story. This is Muhammad talks to one of his companions. You know where that sun's going? I don't know. You know. You're the prophet. It's going to set in a pool. There's no reflection involved here. This is Muhammad telling his companions where the sun's going. Exactly, yeah. So if you're a Muslim, Sam, and you understand how to interpret the Quran, you have to say, the Quran says, Dhul Qarnayn found the place where the sun sets in a pool of water, people live there. Can I reinterpret this? No, because Muhammad gave me the interpretation. Muhammad himself told one of his companions that the sun sets in a pool of water, and therefore, as a Muslim, I have to say, I don't care what my teachers tell me. I don't care what anyone tells me. I don't care what the standard view of the solar system is. The sun sets in a pool of water, and I could actually get there if I traveled. I could go get on my bike and go find the place where the sun sets. And the sun must be small because it's setting in a pool. And I have to believe this as a Muslim. Because, my friends, if you have Muhammad's interpretation and you reject it, you've already rejected Islam. So you might as well go all the way. You can't
embrace a Quran-only position, like you said. Just for the record, if you're going to abandon the Hadith literature, then you do not have any way of demonstrating when the Quran was compiled, where it was compiled, by whom it was compiled, and what are these verses referring to without recourse to the Hadith literature. So if you're going to toss out the Hadith, you have destroyed the very foundation of the Quran. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. So you're stuck with this.
All right, well, that's number 10. We have, an absurd scientific error, but this isn't something that you could ever even possibly reinterpret because you have Muhammad's stamp of approval on the correct interpretation. And boy, is it weird. Number 9, the corruption of the Quran. And this is one of those popular myths of Muslims, that the Quran has been perfectly preserved right down to the letter since it was delivered to Muhammad. And if you read any of the Muslim sources, you find out this is absolute nonsense. When I say corruption of the Quran, we're talking about textual variants, we're talking about passages coming up missing, we're talking about that sort of thing, which I normally wouldn't have a problem with, right? Any text that's been copied for centuries is going to have textual variants, is going to have manuscripts where passages come up missing and so on. So I normally wouldn't raise that as an issue. Islam, however, is a bit different because not only do Muslims claim that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, and so we want to respond to that false view, but we also have a guarantee in the Quran from Allah that He is going to perfectly preserve His word. At least that's how Muslims interpret this passage. So there's a verse in the Quran that Muslims appeal to say that Allah is promising that He's going to perfectly preserve His word, which means that if the Quran has been changed, if parts of the Quran have been lost, then Allah's promise was false, and so why are you believing that it is the Word of God? At least how you're interpreting it. As far as how Muslims interpret preservation, it's right down to the letter. One single change would mean the entire text is unreliable from now on. That's what they say about our Bible, right? There are textual variants in the manuscripts of the Bible, because copyists can copy something down and they misspell a word, they spell it different, that happens, right? And when that happens with us, they say, oh, Bart Ehrman says blah, 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 therefore your Bible has been corrupted and that's enough for corruption. Well, great. Now we have to say that the Quran has been corrupted and that the Quran has been falsified because Allah said He would preserve it, according to the Muslim interpretation. Chapter 15, verse 9 of the Quran says, Allah says, we have without doubt sent down the message, and we will assuredly guard it. And the translator puts in parentheses, from corruption. So this is talking about guarding it from any sort of change. Well, if he's guarding it from any sort of change, then obviously the Quran is not going to change at all in any way. And when we open the Muslim sources, we find all kinds of changes. And there are tons of passages we could read. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of different kinds of change. Missing chapters. Entire chapters of the Quran came up missing, right, Sam?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sahih Muslim, number 2286. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Now, who's Abu Musa? Important guy?
Like I said in the previous show we did, these are the companions of Muhammad. And if these people got Islam wrong, then no one will get Islam right, because Muhammad is reported to have said the best Muslims are the first three generations, starting with his companions, generation afterwards, and the generation after that. If these folk did not get Islam right, no one has gotten Islam right.
And so Muslims today claim to know that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Muhammad's companions had a different story to tell. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, here in Sahih Muslim, sent for the reciters of Basra. So these are the people who recite the Quran there. They came to him, and they were 300 in number, 300 of them reciting the Quran. They recited the Quran, and he said, you are the best among the inhabitants of Basra, for you are the reciters among them. So the people who recite the Quran are the best of the Muslims. So continue to recite it. But bear in mind that your reciting for a long time may not harden your hearts, as were hardened the hearts of those before you. So reciters before these reciters hardened their hearts, got tired of reciting, and what happened? He says, we used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity to Surah Barat. Which surah is that, Sam?
That would actually be chapter 9. Exactly.
9. Chapter 9 of the Quran.
Because it has
very
alternate
long
names, yeah. Surah Al-Bara'ah and then...
At-Tawbah.
Got it.
Well, you can drink your coffee, man.
Yeah, no, shoot.
You're the Assyrian encyclopedia. You're not supposed to slow down.
No, that's right. Yeah, because that means the cancellation. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Surah 9 is one of the long chapters of the Quran, right?
Yes,
it's not one of the short ones.
29 verses.
So when he says in length and severity, it's like Surah Barat. This is a long chapter of the Quran.
Yeah.
And he says, I have, however, forgotten it. Now, maybe he's just saying he forgot it.
129 verses.
Maybe he just forgot this, but he's not saying everyone forgot it, right? Well, he happens to remember something out of it. I have, however, forgotten it, with the exception of this, which I remember out of it. If there were 2 valleys full of riches for the son of Adam, he would long for a 3rd valley, and nothing would fill the stomach of the son of Adam but dust. What verse of the Quran is that, Sam?
Nowhere in the Quran.
So he says there's a chapter. So he says there's a chapter. It's about the same size as Surah Barat. It's about the same size as chapter 9 of the Quran. And here's a verse from it. And that verse isn't in the Quran.
No.
That means that chapter's lost, exactly as he's saying here, right? So what he's saying to the reciters here is, guys, we hardened our hearts. We got sick of reciting the Quran all day, day after day after day. Considering these are the companions, this is the best generation of Muslims. They got sick of reciting the Quran. And we didn't recite enough, and we forgot an entire chapter. We forgot an entire long chapter.
Mind you, 129 verses disappeared from the Quran according to the narration you just cited. Now, some try to get really, what do you call it? They come up with a convenient explanation. They'll say, no. What that was actually a hadith of Muhammad that he thought was part of the
There's no way. 129 verses of a hadith, and Abu Musa doesn't realize it's a hadith?
And not only that, even let's say they're right, you know what that tells you? That they could not tell the difference between Muhammad's words and the Quranic Arabic, because they'll even tell you that what Muhammad said, it's not on the same level as the Arabic of the Quran, because the Arabic of the Quran is unmatchable. And when Muhammad was speaking his words, I mean, he was eloquent, but still it's not the style of the Quran. So if this is a hadith, he couldn't tell the difference between that hadith and the Quran. So that causes even
And
more
this,
problems.
yeah, and this is one of Muhammad's closest companions.
Yeah.
He
So you
can't
got
tell the
problems.
difference. He doesn't know. He doesn't know the difference between the Quran and the Hadith. And so what that is, obviously, is that's later Muslims trying to
Explain it
justify the idea that the Quran has been perfectly preserved when you have Muhammad's companions going around saying entire chapters came up missing.
Wow,
Right?
that should trouble you, Muslim.
He says, I have, however, forgotten it, and he quotes this passage, and he says, and we used to recite a surah which resembled one of the surahs of Musabihat, and I have forgotten it. And he forgets this one too, right? So 2 entire chapters, according to Abu Musa in Sahih Muslim. But the Quran has been perfectly preserved, right, Sam? Perfectly preserved, and yet here you have, in Sahih Muslim, 2 chapters came up missing. But we have others. So that's missing chapters. Well, we also have large sections of individual chapters come up missing. This is from Abu Ubaid's Kitab Fadl al-Quran. Aisha said, Surah 33, used to be recited in the time of the Prophet with 200 verses. But when Uthman wrote out the codices, he was unable to procure more of it than there is in it today. My friends, you can open a Quran right now. Chapter 33 of the Quran contains 73 verses.
Over 100
73 verses. And it once contained over 200. So 2/3 roughly, 2/3 of Surah 33 are missing. They're missing according to Aisha. Aisha says 200, but when Uthman put together the book, we couldn't come up with more than what we have today. But the Quran's been perfectly preserved.
Exactly, 100% preserved.
Here's one that's kind of a funny one, because we talked about missing chapters, missing passages, and now missing verses. Sunan ibn Majah, 1944. It was narrated that Aisha said, the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the Messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it. Now, Sam, the verse of breastfeeding an adult 10 times and the verse of stoning, what references are those in the Quran?
You will not find a single reference in the Quran to adult breastfeeding or stoning those who have committed adultery.
And yet, according to Aisha, they were originally in the Quran. Yeah. Why aren't they in the Quran now? She had the only copy, and while they're worrying about Muhammad's death, a sheep comes in and eats the only copy. Yeah. And then it was gone. And by the way, I don't think it was a coincidence that Aisha had those and that Aisha, they came up missing on Aisha's watch, because those are not verses that any woman would want in her holy book. But think about that. Missing chapters, missing passages, missing verses. And yet any Muslim you run into will say the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Well, Muslims say the Quran has been perfectly preserved because they're putting their confidence in Allah's promise to protect the Quran. Well, if that's what you think Allah means by promising to guard the Quran, then you have to say Allah failed in keeping his promise, and therefore, if that verse was false, if Allah got that one wrong, you can't trust the Quran, and you can't trust Muhammad as a prophet. Muhammad has to be a false prophet. Now, we spent a lot of time on those, so we want to go on to number 7. The doctrine of abrogation. Now, as Christians, we believe that God can give revelations in one covenant and then later on can make a different covenant with a different group of people.
That's right.
So what's the difference here with this doctrine of abrogation that Muslims believe in, and why would we consider this a problem?
And by the way, we'll do number 7, but you did skip number 8, robbery.
Oh, sorry.
So we want to do number 7 first? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The thing of the difference is, what we have in the scriptures is we have God announcing a future covenant that takes centuries for it to be fulfilled. So circumstances have changed, the people have changed, and God is preparing people for a new covenant that doesn't necessarily cancel out the previous commandments, but fulfills them, and they're consummated in the coming of Christ. What you have in the Quran is a phenomenon in which Muhammad will say, look, this is what we're going to do today, or this is what should be done today, and then the very next day or the next week he comes and says, you know what I told you that week prior, forget about it, it's been abrogated, it's been canceled out. That led the disbelievers to accuse Muhammad of forging the Quran, and their response is actually reflected in the Quran itself. So let me just look at 2 references to see what the Quran says, where the response of the people to Muhammad saying, you know what, that's been canceled out, that's been abrogated, what I told you the day before or the week prior. Chapter 2, verse 106 says, none of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that Allah hath power over all things? Don't you know that we have power over all things? This is a demonstration of our power. But let me read a little more accurate translation. Hilali Khan, whatever verse do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things? This is a word of rebuke to those who are questioning the wisdom behind abrogating passages. Allah is saying, man, don't you see this as a display of my power, my sovereignty? Can't you get it? I have the right to do this because I have the power to do this. Well, number 16, verse 101. Let me read this. And when we change a verse, 16:101, when we change a verse in place of another, and Allah knows best of what He sends down, they, meaning the disbelievers, say, you are a forger, a liar, muftari. Nay, but most of them know not. You see the response of disbelievers? You're making this thing up, man. If this is really from an all-knowing God, surely God is not going to cancel out the previous verse when He knows all things. He knows all factors. So He's going to recite the correct verse from the get-go. And Muhammad says, no, man, that's not how it works. This is a display of the power of Allah. He's showing you that He can do what He wants because He has the power to do it. So He'll tell you, don't do this today, but then tomorrow, next day, He says, no, I want you to go ahead and do it. But you know what's even more troubling? For a Muslim. Now, to me, this is great proof that this cannot be from the Quran. In 2:106, notice carefully what Allah supposedly says. Whatever verse do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Now, I can understand you bringing something better. But why would you replace a verse with something similar? If it's similar, it's basically the same, isn't it? I mean, you're basically saying the same thing. So then why even cancel it out for something similar? I can understand that you'd give something better in its place, but even that introduces problems. How can some verses be better than other verses? I thought all of this is the speech of God. And not only the speech of God, it's the uncreated, eternal speech of God. Are you saying that in some instances Allah speaks better than in other instances? Is that what the Muslim wants me to believe?
Yeah, and the additional problem I see is this is Allah's eternal word, right?
Yeah.
And in Allah's eternal word, on the last program we talked about a verse of the Quran saying that if this had been from other than Allah, they would have found in it much discrepancy, right? Exactly. Now, in Allah's eternal word then, right? So this is before any of this has been revealed. This is before anything is revealed to Muhammad. This is before any specific historical situations. In Allah's eternal word, He has a verse saying that there are no discrepancies in this book. And He'll have a verse saying that you're supposed to do one thing, and He'll have a verse saying that you're supposed to do something completely different. Exactly. So for instance, you go to one passage of the Quran and find out that the penalty for sexual sin is house arrest. You can go to another passage, find out that the penalty for sexual sin is lashes. And you go to the Hadith and find out that the penalty for the sexual sin is stoning. You find all these different things. Yeah. You find that's supposed to be in the Quran. And this is part of the eternal Quran because even though a sheep ate the verses, they're still part of Allah's eternal word. And so you have these different penalties, and you have another verse saying there's no discrepancies, and this is in Allah's eternal word. So you have His eternal word, and you have all the verses that apply, and you have all the verses that are abrogated, and they're all mixed in there together telling people to do completely different things, but there's no discrepancies in this eternal word. This is the problem even the pagans of Muhammad's time could recognize. What you're saying about the Quran makes no sense. There's no way you can possibly be a prophet, and that's why you have to fight and subjugate them.
And interestingly, this contradicts two other eternal words. In chapter 18, verse 27, and chapter 6, verse 115, it says, there is no changing to the words of Allah. None can change the words of Allah. Those passages have actually led certain Muslims, like the late Muhammad Asad, to deny the doctrine of abrogation. He actually admits, if you get his Quran commentary, he admits in his commentary that the doctrine of abrogation that's traditionally understood conflicts with these passages that say none can change His words. But here we have many changes taking place by direct orders from Allah. So abrogation is a serious problem.
So we called that number 7. That was actually number 8 because we wanted to get to robbery. So we'll go ahead and get to that now. Muhammad, when he leaves Mecca, he was persecuted in Mecca because he kept antagonizing them, making fun of their gods.
And that's vitally important to emphasize.
And so he
started it.
Yeah, they persecuted him. As long as he wasn't mocking their gods, they didn't have a problem with them. That's in the Muslim sources. It's only because he kept ridiculing their gods and just insulting and degrading their religious beliefs. I'm pointing that out because that's what Muslims say that no one's supposed to do about Islam, but that's exactly what Muhammad did. So if he's the moral example, you should always criticize other people's religions. But Muhammad was persecuted in Mecca, we acknowledge that, and he eventually fled Mecca, went to Medina. Now, once he's in Medina, how much do the Meccans care about him?
They don't even think about him. They don't even mention him. They don't even lose sleep over him anymore.
The troublemaker is gone.
That's it.
We can get some sleep now, right?
Life is back to normal.
And Muhammad, now that he was in a different city, he had the opportunity to live in peace without conflict and just couldn't do it. What does he do? He starts robbing the Meccan caravans. And interestingly, they keep failing, right? They keep trying to launch raids against the Meccan caravans. So if you get in mind, Mecca is kind of in the middle of nowhere. They don't have a lot of natural resources, so they have to get things through trade. They have to get what they need through trade. So people would invest in the caravan trade, trading supplies along different trade routes. And Muhammad is starting to attack the caravans, rob them.
Exactly.
And this is dangerous because if you invest everything your family has in order to get something back, and Muhammad robs it along the way, you starve. You starve to death. So this was, let's say it, this is terrorism, right? He's trying to terrorize you. You don't know if your livelihood is safe any longer. And so Muhammad tries over and over again to rob the caravans. He keeps failing until he eventually has a successful raid. What happened there?
And that happens during one of the forbidden months of fighting. And it's mentioned in chapter 2, verse 217 of the Quran. Let me just read the commentary by Ali al-Wahdi in his Asbab al-Nuzul. Al-Wahdi in his Asbab al-Nuzul, and give you the context. Now let me read this. Urwa ibn al-Zubayr informed us that the Messenger of Allah sent a military expedition against unsuspecting caravan, by the way. They were not prepared for an attack, and they were not going to war. Military expedition, and appointed Abdullah ibn Jash al-Asdi as its leader. This expedition proceeded until they reached Nakhla, which is near Mecca, where they found Amr ibn al-Hadrami leading a trade caravan for the Quraysh. That day was the last day of the sacred month, where it was forbidden to fight and wage war. The Muslims were divided in their opinion, right? Some of them said, we know for certain that today belongs to the sacred month. Now notice, they're aware of this, right? We are aware of the view that you should for certain, that today belongs to the sacred month. We are aware of you that you should not violate it because of greed. Notice, don't do it because you're greedy. This is going to start problems. It's a sacred month. The opinion of those who desire the stuff of this world gained the upper hand. They attacked Ibn al-Hadrami, killed him. They killed this man and seized his camels. Now I can read the rest of this, but you get the picture. Here it was the forbidden month where you could not attack other people, especially unsuspecting caravan that was carrying goods for the welfare of the people at Mecca. What do the Muslims do? Decide to attack and kill this person in order to steal their goods and bring him back to Medina. And now that caused problems, but again, remember, Allah is only too quick to fulfill the desires of Muhammad. He hastens to fulfill the desires of Muhammad. And chapter 2, verse 217 was revealed to justify what Muhammad did, basically. Now, I have the verse. I can read it if you want to read it.
Go ahead and read the verse real quick.
Real quickly, because I know time is winding down. 2:217. Notice Allah's response to this atrocity. What did Allah say in light of this atrocity? They asked thee concerning fighting in the sacred months. Fighting therein is a grave offense. Yeah, it is wrong. Quran is acknowledging it. But worse still in the sight of Allah is to prevent access to the path of Allah, to deny Him, to prevent access to the sacred mosque and drive out its members. Tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. Do you get it? The justification? Yeah, it's bad. But you know what's worse? That you allow Muhammad and his followers to come and visit the sacred mosque, that you drove Muhammad out from Mecca because he wanted to worship Allah alone.
So there's a general truce. You violate the truce, kill someone who's just trying to trade some goods, and yeah, that's kind of bad that you did that in the sacred month, but it's okay because they did something to you first. Welcome to Islam. All right, that would be number 7. We'll cover number 6 very briefly. On our last program, we talked about the black stone, right? Yeah. Kissing the black stone, which was a pagan idol, and bowing down towards the Kaaba, which was a small pagan temple.
Exactly.
And these are pagan practices, and so we wanted to point out that Islam adopts pagan rituals as part of the heart of Islamic worship, right? So now we're not just talking about the idols, we're talking about the religious practices associated with those idols, that Islam adopts pagan practices as part of the 5 pillars, right?
Exactly.
So what are we talking about here? What is the Hajj?
Well, that's the pilgrimage that you must perform in Mecca, where you visit the Kaaba and perform the rites associated with the Kaaba, such as
So
running
did
between...
Muslims invent this?
No, no.
Okay.
They'll even admit to you that these were practices observed by the pagans before Muhammad. But their justification for it is, but Ishmael settled there.
We have any records of Ishmael being there?
None whatsoever.
Have any records of Abraham having
Never.
anything to do with
None
this? No.
whatsoever.
Okay.
But we do have admission from Muslim sources the pagans were doing it.
Okay.
So at least they admit that part. And so what Muhammad did was he repackaged these pagan rituals in a monotheistic context. In fact, I encourage all Muslims to get a copy of the Abdullah Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran with the commentary and read throughout chapter 2 of the Quran and see his commentary where he basically admits that Islam spiritualized these practices that the pagans were actually observing. So he has to admit these are pagan practices, but Muhammad supposedly purified them and spiritualized them and restored them to their true meaning.
So the pagans are taking a trip to Mecca. The pagans are walking
Seven
circles around
times
this building.
for their 7 planetary deities, by the way.
The pagans are kissing this rock. The pagans are are saying their prayers, bowing down to this building. The pagans are throwing this stone. We're going to do all of that, but we're going to do it for Allah, and that makes us not pagans, right?
Exactly.
And so what we see here is Islam doesn't come and say, hey, stop these pagan practices. Islam comes along and says, we're going to adopt all of these pagan practices. And that's the true religion, right? And they condemn the pagans. Very interesting stuff. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with our final 5 reasons to reject Muhammad as a prophet for the evening. Stay tuned. We talked, right before the break, we talked about Muhammad stealing practices from the pagans. He takes practices that are part of this pagan religion, adopts them, puts Allah's stamp of approval on them, and says now they're Muslim practices, and they've always been Muslim practices. Well, you find Muhammad doing this with lots of things, and one of the ways he does this is with stories. The Christians of Muhammad's time, the Jews of Muhammad's time, the pagans of Muhammad's time, all told various stories about the figures that they believe in. And what you find in the Quran and Muslim sources is that Muhammad adopts these as true Muslim stories. And what's interesting is that some of the times we know where the story comes from. Some of the times we know exactly where the story comes from. Muhammad takes stories that are not true and that we know are not true, and he adopts them as part of the Quran. So, for instance, according to Surah 19, Jesus began preaching as soon as he came out of Mary's womb. Now, the difficulty here is that no one in the first century reports this, and this is certainly something Jesus' early followers would have reported. But the bigger problem is we know where the story comes from. We know where the story comes from. It comes from the Arabic infancy gospel, which scholars unanimously reject as an obvious forgery. You couldn't have a more obvious forgery that doesn't go back to the first century. And Muhammad adopts the story as part of Islam. And this is a pattern we find over and over again when we look at the Quran. Muhammad tells a story, and we could trace the story back to a forgery or to some other historically inaccurate account. And let me give you another example. In the Bible, Genesis chapter 15, we're told that God called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur of the Chaldeans. In the Babylonian language, Ur just means city. So this is the city. This is city of the Chaldeans. That's Babylonia, right? We have to make a point about different languages. In the first century, a Jewish rabbi named Jonathan ben Uziel was translating Genesis 15 into Aramaic, and he came to this word Ur. Now, Jonathan didn't know Babylonian. He didn't know this language. So he confused the Babylonian word Ur, which means city, with the Hebrew word Ur, which means fire. And so when Abraham is delivered out of the city of the Chaldeans, Jonathan ben Uziel translates this as Abraham was delivered out of the fire of the Chaldeans. And why is this interesting? Well, if you open up your Quran, you'll find out that in the Quran, in Surah 21, Muhammad reports that Abraham was delivered out of the fire. So Abraham is delivered from the fire. Now, I don't know what you do with this, right? We know the origin of the story. The story is based on a mistranslation. of the book of Genesis. The story became popular, circulating in Arabia during this time, of Abraham being delivered from a fire. And then the story of Abraham being delivered from a fire, lo and behold, becomes part of the Quran. Now, what do you do with this? Do you say that Jonathan ben Uziel, he accidentally, he mistranslated it, but then he got it right through his mistranslation, and there was this lost story about Abraham being delivered from fire, and people didn't know, and he got it right by mistranslation, then Muhammad picked it up? What do you do with this? This is, and we find this over and over again in the Muslim sources. But so Muhammad doesn't just adopt practices that were pagan in origin. He adopts stories that are obviously false and we know are false, and Muslims will still cling to the Quran as the clear word of God. All right, well, that's number 5. Muhammad steals stories, and they are sometimes false. Number 4, it goes back to something we mentioned a few moments ago. We talked about the verse of breastfeeding an adult. And some of you are wondering, what in the world is this talking about? According to the Muslim sources, there's supposed to be a verse in the Quran, or multiple verses in the Quran, about breastfeeding an adult. So what kind of verses are we talking about here, Sam? What is it that's supposed to be in the Quran here?
Well, according to Islam, which is based on the Quran, just to give a little background why there would be this issue of breastfeeding adult, the Quran honors something called fosterage relations. Even though it abolished adoption, fostered relations is honored. What is fosterage? What do I mean by relationship established by fosterage? Well, it was a common practice back then, even now, where let's say your mother suckled me as I was an infant.
So she breastfed you.
Yeah, she breastfed me. And let's say one time would be 10 breastfeedings, and then it was reduced to 5.
But those are both supposed to be in the Quran, right? One abrogates the other.
Yeah. Now, if that happened, then that means she's now my foster mother, you are my foster brother, and your sisters and my sisters are off limits because I'm now considered her child through breastfeeding. Now, a situation arose at the time of Muhammad because, and I have to smile, and again, stuff like this.
There's no helping it, Sam. We're going to be smiling on this one, and so is everyone who's watching this who's not a Muslim. Muslims are going to be horrified. Everyone else is going to be cracking up laughing because this is just silly.
This is found all throughout the authentic collection of narrations called Sahih Muslim. Because Muhammad had abolished adoption, and we had mentioned that as one of the reasons why he cannot be a prophet in the previous program, so go back and watch that. He abolished adoption. Now this caused problems because there were Muslims who had adopted children who are now grown men who are no longer their adopted children, and now the Muslim men felt uncomfortable having these men in their homes in the presence of their wives. So now how do you solve this problem that Muhammad created by abolishing adoption?
So you're worried about grown men being around grown women that they're not married to, and they're got to be close in the same area as each other, so you're worried about them having lust for each other. How are you going to deal with this lust problem?
Well, let me tell you how Muhammad dealt with it. Sahih Muslim, Book 8, number 3424. Sahih Muslim, Book 8, number 3424. Aisha reported that Sahla bin Suhair came to Allah's apostle and said, Messenger of Allah, I see on the face of Abu Hudhayfa, her husband, right, signs of disgust on entering of Salim. Salim was his adopted son, into our house, whereupon Allah's apostle said, suckle him. She said, how can I suckle him as he's a grown-up man? Allah's messenger smiled and said, I already know that he's a young man. Amr has made this addition in his narration that he participated in Battle Badr and the narration of Ibn Umar. Allah's messenger laughed. In other words, he goes, I know he's a grown man, but go ahead, suckle him.
So breastfeed this grown man.
Take this grown man, let him suckle your breast a number of times, then he becomes your foster son, and then your husband will have nothing to worry about.
So this is supposedly based on a Quran verse, right?
Yes.
Where the point is to deal with potential lust between two adults, right? You've got a woman and a man. These two people are going to be around each other. Maybe they work around each other, but they're going to be spending time around each other. How do we keep them from having sex, illicit sex with each other? Well, we've got a solution here. Allah gives the solution in the Quran. She has to breastfeed this man 10 times. So she's going to take out her breast, take him in private, put his face and his mouth on her breast. She's got to do this 10 times, and after she breastfeeds this man 10 times, after she puts her breast in his mouth 10 times, then he'll feel like her son, and they won't have any sexual desire for each other. Now, this eventually got abrogated down to 5, right?
That's right. That's what Aisha said.
So it went from 10 down to 5. This is supposed to be in the Quran, so there's supposed to be a 10, then there's supposed to be a 5. Neither one is in the Quran. Why? Aisha's the one who had these written down, and my sheep came and ate them.
How convenient, right?
Sorry, everyone, that I lost this verse that says I have to breastfeed an adult man if I'm around him anymore in order to do away with the sexual tension in the room. But this is from God, ladies and gentlemen. This is from God,
in fact,
according to Islam.
The next narration that follows this one, 34:24, let me just read the last part to see what happened. She goes, she returned after what Muhammad said and told him, so I suckled him. So she did it. She did exactly what you said she would need to do, and was there in the heart of Abu Hudhayfa, disappeared. So now the husband was happy. Oh, so you suckled this grown man? You gave him your breast to suckle? I'm okay right now, because that means now he's our foster son.
We're all good now. Wow, but you Muslims out there, everyone else is laughing right now. You Muslims should be either crying or something. But I mean, think about this: if you take Islam seriously, you have to believe that that is God's solution for sexual tension, right? You know, we don't need the burqa in order to do away with that. If a woman's going to be working around a man, it doesn't matter how much she's covered up. If we're going to eliminate the sexual tension, she's got to take him in the back room and breastfeed him a bunch of times to end any of that sexual tension. That's what your God revealed. But I would say anyone can recognize there's no way God revealed that, because that is not, God knows that's not true. God knows that's not how things work between men and women. All right, well, that's number 4. Number 3, Sam. This is a controversial one, but we just happen to have tons of sources reporting that Muhammad used to dress up in his wife's clothes, that he used to at least put on their robes, their dresses.
Their dresses, exactly.
Now, what that means, if he's just laying there in bed or something like this, and he wraps up in it or something like that, if you want to believe that, that's fine. Why doesn't he have? I mean, when he's getting all this war booty, why doesn't he have his own robes to wrap up in? But we have Muhammad wearing the robes and dresses of his wives.
Yeah, in fact, even the Arabic words that are used in the context make it clear. It's thob and mirt, and in the context, it's clear it's women's dresses and clothing.
That's what mirt means, right?
Yeah,
green dress.
Yeah, exactly. Now, they try to explain away, but the point is, even the context says that it's a woman's thob, a woman's mirt, meaning clothing and garment. Now, interestingly, in Deuteronomy 22:5, if you read the Arabic translation of Deuteronomy 22:5, you actually see the word thob used in reference to the prohibition of a man wearing a woman's thob, clothing. Now let me read the English translation. Deuteronomy 22:5, the New International Version. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing. And the Arabic translation of this passage says a woman's thob. You'll see the relevance in a minute. For the Lord or Yahweh your God detests anyone who does this. Now, I'm going to read, for the sake of time, these two narrations real quickly. They are translations done by people in English, one by a Muslim and another by an Islamic scholar, both of whom realize that these terms in these contexts inarguably prove that Muhammad was wearing the garment, the clothing of a woman. Now let me read from Aisha Bewley's translation of Sahih Bukhari, number 2442. And you can find Aisha Bewley's English translation of the Quran, of Bukhari online for free. Do Aisha Bewley Bukhari translation. This comes from her particular translation. Now, I'm going to just read this for the sake of time. I was going to read the other one, but our time is fleeting. Let me just read this. It is related from Aisha that the wives of the Messenger of Allah fell into two parties. One party contained Aisha, Hafsa, Safiya, and Sauda, and the other party contained Salama and the rest of the wives of the Messenger of Allah. The Muslims knew of the love of the Messenger of Allah for Aisha. So when any of them had a gift which he wanted to give to the Messenger of Allah, he would delay it until the Messenger of Allah was in Aisha's house. Now the women got angry. They're upset that this was happening only in Aisha's house. So they actually asked Muhammad's daughter to go and complain. Now when she went and complained, notice Muhammad's justification. Now let me read it. I'm trying to skip through this for the sake of time. Notice what he says to the complaint. He said to her, do not injure me regarding Aisha. Don't bother me concerning Aisha and my preferential treatment of her. For the revelation does not come to me when I am in the garment of any woman except Aisha. Do you see the justification? Don't injure me, don't hurt me towards my preferential treatment of Aisha. Because let me tell you something. The only time I get inspired when I'm in women's garments is when I'm in the garment of Aisha. When I'm in the garment of any other woman, it doesn't happen. So Allah himself is showing me that I'm okay in preferring Aisha and wearing her garment because I only get inspired in her garment and no other woman's garment.
So now, there are multiple problems here, and we did an entire program going through the different problems here. But the Quran says don't have more than one wife unless you can treat them fairly, right?
Yes.
And Muhammad doesn't just get the 4 wives that the Quran allows, he gets at least 9 or 11 at one time. And what's he do? He starts giving Aisha special treatment. And when he's called out on it, right? Muhammad, could you at least honor the Quran, O Prophet, and treat us fairly? His response is, hey, what are you telling me for? It's Allah who gives me revelations when I'm in Aisha's dress, but not when I'm wearing the dresses of the rest of you. So it's not just that he's wearing women's clothes, it's that he's receiving revelations when he's dressed in Aisha's dress, and that he then uses this as justification to violate the commands of Allah because Allah gave him this revelation during the time when he's wearing Aisha's garment. How many different ways is this just messed up, right? I mean, this is messed up, but this is the perfect prophet, right, everyone? All right, well, we have 2 more points to get through, so let's get through them quickly. Number 2 is very important because, again, this is along the lines of when Muslims adopt pagan practices and pagan rituals and bow down to a pagan temple and pagan idols, all the while they're condemning everyone else for idolatry. And Muhammad came, of course, to get rid of all this idolatry, and yet he encouraged it and made it part of his religion. But think, Muslims condemn us for believing that Jesus is Lord when that's the claim Jesus made about himself, that he is the divine and eternal Son who entered creation to save us. But Muslims tell us, oh, that's idolatry, that's paganism, and then we turn to their view of Muhammad, and is he just merely a man, just like any other man who happened to be chosen by God as a prophet? Yes, very good, but nevertheless, clearly just a man.
Nope. In fact, we need to further add that Jesus at least claimed to be God in the flesh, and so when we worship him, when we pray to him, when we invoke him, and when we depend upon him for salvation, it's because we're not depending on a mere creature, but God, the eternal Son, the divine Son, who became flesh. Muslims will deny that Muhammad is a divinity. And yet, Islam is dependent. Salvation in Islam is dependent on not just confessing and testifying that Allah is God, but that Muhammad is his messenger, and also submitting fully, not just to Allah, but to Muhammad as well. You cannot be a Muslim, and therefore you cannot be saved, if you do not verbally confess that Allah is God, there is no deity but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and you cannot be saved and you cannot be pardoned unless you submit to Muhammad fully, submit to Muhammad equally as you do to Allah. Now, where am I getting this from? Again, let me just read 2 verses real quickly and then show you that Muslims daily pray to Muhammad, that they direct a portion of their prayers to Muhammad every day, even though he's been dead for about 1400 years. Let's look at chapter 4, verse 64 to 65 of the Quran. Let's see what it says about salvation, forgiveness of sins, and Islam being dependent on fully surrendering to Muhammad and coming to him. Chapter 4, verses 64 to 65. We sent no messenger but to be obeyed by Allah's leave. If they, the hypocrites, when they had been unjust to themselves, had come to you, Muhammad, had they come to you and begged Allah's forgiveness, and the messenger had begged forgiveness for them, indeed they would have found Allah all forgiving. Now notice that, David. You can't just go to Allah to be forgiven. You have to come to Muhammad, and Muhammad has to pray and ask Allah to forgive you in order to be forgiven. That's 464. Now notice what 65 says. But know, by your Lord, they can have no faith. You can't be a true Muslim, a true believer, until they make you, Muhammad, judge in all disputes between them and find in themselves no resistance against your decisions, but accept them with full submission. Now Islam means to submit. Here we're told you don't just fully submit to Allah, but to Muhammad and to every one of his desires and whims. Does that sound like Islam is the religion of submitting to Allah alone?
No, and that's something we continue to point out, that when Muslims appeal to potential converts here in the West, Islam is just this pure worship of Allah. You want to worship God, don't you? You want to submit to God, don't you? But Islam is a package deal. It's not just submitting to God, it's submitting to Muhammad. submitting to Muhammad.
Completely and
yes.
fully, not just externally. It says internally, having no doubts or no disagreements with anything that Muhammad has commanded and decided. That's the Quran, chapter 4, verse 64, 65. You find that in chapter 33, verse 36. And in chapter 9, verse 103, it says that your invocations is a means of security for the believers. Your invocations is a means that guarantees the security of believers, even though he himself was not guaranteed salvation. As we mentioned in a previous program, irony of ironies. The man who says that he doesn't know what Allah will do with him, here we're told that his prayers are a source of security for those who turn to him. Now again, because time is fleeting, Muslims 5 times a day in their 5 daily prayers are speaking to a dead man, a man who's been dead for 1400 years, directing part of their prayer, which is worship, mind you. Salat is worship. Part of their salat, includes speaking to a man who's been dead for 1400 years. Now, what am I talking about? This practice is known as tashahhud when you are testifying. Tashahhud, let me read Sahih Muslim, book 4, number 798. Sahih Muslim, book 4, number 798. Pay attention that Muhammad commands them to utter the following words in their 5 daily prayers. If you don't do this, your prayer is not complete. Ibn Abbas reported the Messenger of Allah used to teach us tashahhud, the testification, shahada, just as he used to teach us a surah of the Quran. And he would say, now this is Muhammad telling him how to pray, all services rendered by words, acts of worship, and all good things are due to Allah. Now pay attention to this, David. Peace be upon you, O Prophet. Peace be upon you, O Prophet, and Allah's mercy and blessings. Peace be upon us and upon Allah's upright servants. I testify there is no God but Allah, and I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And in the narration of Ibn Rum, the words are added, as he used to teach us the Quran. Did you catch it? Muhammad is telling them, when you pray 5 times a day, you say the following. Part of which includes saying to Muhammad, peace be upon you, O Prophet, no matter where you're at, and despite the fact that he's been dead for 1400 years,
and so
you have to say this.
So just to clarify, you're not saying, God, please send peace on Muhammad.
No.
Right? We would understand, like for instance, this is the difference between saying, God, my grandma died, please bless her.
Yeah,
and
even though we don't pray for that. Yeah.
And me saying in my prayers, Grandma, peace be upon you. Then you're talking not to God about grandma, you're talking to grandma.
Directly.
Which presupposes what? That grandma can hear your prayers.
Conscious and alive.
And if you're talking to Muhammad in your Muslim prayers around the world, then Muhammad is what?
He has to be omniscient.
He's omniscient. He knows all of these prayers, and that's an attribute of what? Of a mere human being?
No, that shows that he must be God. He must be divine.
Now, there are many other ways that Muslims
Exactly.
deify Muhammad. We've just given a couple, and we've had programs on this before. But this is not how you treat an ordinary human being. You don't pray every day and direct your prayer, at least part of it, to an ordinary human being. You don't submit completely in the exact same way you submit to God to an ordinary human being. And that's just what we find in all the other situations. Yeah, we're kissing the black stone, but it's not idolatry when we do it. Yeah, we bow down to the pagan temple, but it's not paganism when we do it. Yeah, we do all the things to this guy that other religions do and we call idolatry, but we're not being idolaters when we do it. It's okay for us to talk directly to Muhammad, who's merely a human being, in our prayers. Wow, this is some wild, wild stuff. All right, well, we've gone through 9 of our reasons, and we've been concluding on a Christian point in each one of these. But we've been doing it, we've been emphasizing something different in each one of these. So our number 1 reason Muhammad's not a prophet for tonight is the spectacular way Islam reverses the gospel. It is a direct reversal. We've often said that, the Bible says that false teachers and false prophets are coming into the world. And if you look at Muhammad, he denies the core message of the gospel according to the New Testament. In other words, in the gospel, Jesus taught all kinds of things. But there was the core of the message that his closest companions went out and preached. And they always focused on his death by crucifixion, his resurrection from the dead, and his divine nature. Death, resurrection, deity. They always hit those 3 points. So if false teachers are going to come and try to corrupt that message, we can expect them to corrupt what? Death, resurrection, and deity. Muhammad comes along years later, and what's he say? Does he say, oh, it's all wrong, it's all Christianity's false, Jesus is a deceiver? No, he says, you Christians, you believe in God, so do I. You believe Jesus was born of a virgin, so do I. You believe he lived the most miraculous life in history, so do I. You believe he's the Messiah, so do I. You believe in all these things, so do I. I agree with you, ladies and gentlemen. There are just these three little things that we need to change. Jesus didn't die on the cross for sins, he didn't rise from the dead, and he didn't claim to be divine. The Christian response, of course, is, we've been waiting for you. But think about the reversal, because according to what Muslims tell us, Jesus didn't die by crucifixion. Well, who did? Judas. Judas died by crucifixion, according to what Muslims tell us today. Now think about that. The Christian gospel is that the one who is perfect and knew no sin died on behalf of the guilty, showing his supreme love and satisfying God's supreme justice. Islam reverses it and says the guilty, evil Judas was sacrificed in place of the righteous Jesus. And Muslims look at that and say, oh, you see, that's better. But then they end up with God as a deceiver, and they end up trying to destroy the greatest message ever delivered to human beings, a message that was verified by God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and Muslims try to do it away in the most insulting manner imaginable, a direct reversal. And again, that is exactly what we would expect if the Bible's true, that false prophets are going to come and are going to corrupt that message. In other words, we have confirmation from the Bible that the Christian message is true, and we're told false prophets are going to do something specific. They're going to try to corrupt that message. Exactly. So if someone comes along, whoever it is, and then goes against that message, especially someone who does it in a more obvious way than anyone else in history, like Muhammad, where he goes after every single one of the core teachings of the gospel and tries to flip them, that's identification from God that this man is a false prophet, and that's why no one should ever believe in him. Amen. Well, Sam, we've gone through 40, count them, 40 reasons Muhammad cannot be a prophet. 40 reasons that no one should believe in him. But you know, if you get to 40, it almost seems necessary that you have to go to 50, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think 40. We should leave at 40. I don't like 40. I like 50.